Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. We're learning more about the suspect in Sunday night's mass shooting out in Las Vegas that killed 59 people and injured more than 500. The details are disturbing. Of course, Stephen Paddock had an arsenal of weapons of war up in his hotel room. Police found, now it counts to 23 guns he had there. There were 19 more guns found in his home with explosives and thousands of bullets. He also had 2 bump stocks. Those are devices that can make semi-automatic weapons mimic fully automatic ones. In other words, machine guns. In fact, you can hear the sound of one. Every bit of that sound could be used to kill people, and it did. Should these kinds of weapons be available in this country? Well, today, President Trump praised the response to the shooting. He tweeted, "I am so proud of our great country. God bless America." Before boarding a flight to Puerto Rico, he was asked if now is the time for stiffer gun laws.
Look, we have a tragedy. We're going to do, and what happened in Las Vegas is in many ways a miracle. The police department has done such an incredible job, and we'll be talking about gun laws as time goes by. But I do have to say, how quickly the police department was able to get in was really very much of a miracle. They've done an amazing job.
Who came up with that leisure suit he's wearing? Anyway, the president, many Republicans want to put off a discussion on gun laws, obviously, put off permanently. They argue now's not the time, though there never will be a time. Those poor dears, they can't handle the conversation. But while we might never know the shooter's motive, we know his ballistic capability. And the question now, are we willing to live in a society where incidents like this become fairly regular happenings? By the way, they are. We begin with the latest on the investigation itself. NBC's Steve Patterson is in Las Vegas. Steve, thank you for your reporting. Tell us what's the up-to-date accounting of how much weaponry, how much firepower this man possessed.
Well, Chris, you just said it best. This is an arsenal fit for war, at least a small militia inside that hotel room. 23 weapons. Right now, though, we're next to the crime scene. It's very active. You saw police activity to my left. Beyond this police line is a street. Beyond that street is a barrier. Beyond that barrier is Route 91 Concert Festival, where those 22,000 people were packed in, and that shooter was firing down below. Inside that hotel room, you said it, a variable arsenal. We're talking about a mixture of semi-automatic long guns, along with stocks for stability, scopes for distance, hammers to break out the windows, and as we learned tonight, cameras both in and outside of that hotel room, as the sheriff put it, to see if the police were going to be greeted by the suspect. All this to say, as the sheriff said today in a press conference, he believes that this was a meticulously planned attack, a meticulously planned mass murder upon those people below. That's not to mention the 19 guns that were found in his home or the explosive material that was found in the suspect's car, Chris.
All of it legal, right, as we know?
Well, look, Chris, this is Nevada. I mean, people come to Nevada to fire fully automatic weapons. There are gun ranges up and down the strip. If you want to do that, you can. You don't need a permit for most weapons here. You don't need a registration for most weapons here. Machine guns are regulated a little bit more tightly. It's a federal thing, but there are so many loopholes in this state to get around that, including modification. And as we've been mentioning, at least one, maybe 2 of those weapons were heavily modified, if not for fully automatic fire, then for nearly fully automatic fire, Chris.
And now Las Vegas will be known, among other things, for this. Thank you, NBC's Steve Patterson. Great report, Las Vegas. For more, let's bring in USA Today's Heidi Presley here with me, and Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson also next to me, and U.S. Congressman Ruben Kihuen of Nevada. Congressman, I want to talk to you about this. Gun control. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I know it's a touchy issue. Where's it going to take a state like yours that goes all the way, practically all the way to Tommy guns, in terms of law enforcement and in terms of whether we use the law to control weaponry?
Chris, thoughts and prayers are important, but we need to do a lot more. It's time for action. It's time for Congress and each state to take it upon themselves to pass laws to protect our American citizens. It is unacceptable what happened today here in Las Vegas, and it is unacceptable all across the country.
Well, what do the people feel that you represent? I mean, you must be in touch with you today. You must be getting calls. Do they want gun control, or do they want us to lay off and let them be libertarians about it?
Look, our state of Nevada has already in the last election, passed a ballot initiative to have universal background checks. Unfortunately, it's caught up in the courts because the AG refuses to listen to the will of Nevadans. And so we're going to continue fighting this in the court. We have to fight this at the congressional level. And I am asking my colleagues in Congress that we need to take action. Thoughts and prayers are important, but it's not enough. We have to take action in Congress.
You know, my theory about this is that we'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out the psychology of this killer who did all this murder and mayhem, and we'll probably never get to the bottom of it, but we can get to the bottom of what he possessed and his capability. And my suggestion, I'll put it to you as a lawmaker, if you give 100 people the kind of weaponry that this guy had, put it in their hands, a lot of them are going to use it. It's just a question of access and availability and knowing that every several hundred people are going to have a little problem, a little anger that day. If you give everybody the gun, somebody's going to use them. And my question to you is, how can people defend the ability of people to go out and buy all this hardware, all this, and be able to just to upgrade a gun to a Tommy gun, basically, because they feel like doing it?
Look, it's incomprehensible to me how this killer managed to bring 23 weapons into the hotel room. It's incomprehensible to me how he had thousands and thousands of ammo. You know, there's got to be a limit to the amount of ammo in the magazine.
Under the law you have out in Nevada, who would have stopped him?
This is exactly why we need to change the law. This is exactly why Americans are fed up with Congress and with our legislators, because they refuse to take action. You know, we're tired of seeing rhetoric. We're tired of seeing these type of shootings. We have to take action, and it has to be immediately.
A year from now, will the laws be any different?
Look, we saw what happened in Pulse a year ago. Nothing has changed shootings. We have to take action, and it has to be immediately.
A year from now, will the laws be any different?
Look, we saw what happened in Pulse a year ago. American people deserve better. The American people deserve to feel safe.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us. Congressman Keywan of Nevada. I want to go back to Heidi and to Gene. Gene, you know, and I love parallels. I know you write about parallels. You're given to that like all great columnists. You know, we couldn't win in Vietnam because we're going to stay. They're going to stay there. And we're going to come home.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know, and I love parallels. I know you write about parallels. You're given to that like all great columnists. You know, we couldn't win in Vietnam because we're going to stay. They're going to stay there. And we're going to come home.
Yeah, right.
Well, the people who are for gun control get interested in something for a while, but the gun owners stay with it. They never leave it. They're the home team, and they're never going to let people touch their guns.
Exactly, and they always have the edge on intensity on that image, and that has been the case for years and years and years, and is certainly the case now. And you know, looking at the national level, the federal level, this Congress and this president, I wish I could work myself up into thinking that something would happen, but I can't.
Heidi, once you get west of New York State, in fact, better stay down the city part of New York, the suburban part, you run into gun country. I grew up with it from all the way from Allentown all the way out to goddamn Wyoming. Anywhere you are, it's all gun country, except maybe Chicago.
It has been such a bloody and devastating shift in our gun culture.
I shouldn't say damned Wyoming. I actually like that state, but it's all part of that whole swath of people that are very pro-gun.
Okay, Chris, but what's happened to gun culture over the past 10 to 30 years? We've gone from just your traditional bolt-action pistols that people use for hunting, but that wasn't going to last for, and the NRA knew that. They knew that hunting culture is decreasing. So they start pushing these semi-automatic weapons and pump out the fear and the paranoia as well. That, first of all, convincing people that they need the semi-automatics to defend themselves, that these pistols are not going to do the trick. You need these street weapons, these war weapons to defend yourself.
And how do you use one of those? You go, if somebody's knocking on your window, they're trying to get in your house, you go find the machine gun.
Right, you go find your machine gun, and what do you do? I mean, it's just it's ridiculous as a defensive weapon. It's ridiculous as a weapon to use to shoot a deer or a rabbit or anything. Yeah. I mean, but there are 300 million guns in this country, and an awful lot of them are assault rifles.
Well, what do you think? We're going to get these people on as the day's going, but to the real gun person, what's their reaction to this horror? What do they say? Well, the guys, I know what it is. Evil.
There's nothing you can do. They say there's nothing that you can do because if these people are evil and they want to get the guns, they're going to get them. but they completely dismiss when confronted with any of the facts that this is a unique problem in our country. So either there's something wrong with our laws, or we have a unique high number of evil people in our country.
There has been polling of gun owners and of NRA members, and in both cases they've shown majorities, for example, in favor of universal background checks.
90-some%.
Exactly, and to say nothing of the opinion of the whole country, which is even more in favor of universal background checks, just as a first step. And we could not even get that after Newtown. After
because it comes back to intensity. Who killed Newtown? It was the red state Democrats. A number of Republicans like John McCain and Susan Collins found it within themselves. Because it comes back to intensity. Who killed Newtown? It was the red state Democrats. A number of Republicans like John McCain and Susan Collins found it within themselves to vote for that modest measure. It was the red state Democrats who feared, had this outsized fear of the NRA, which in the end was not there for them. Folks like Mark Begich
takes an absolute position, and the NRA is still one of the most powerful lobbies in town.
Let me give you the latest example of loony. Last night on the show, the 700 Club, Pat Robertson blamed the shooting in Las Vegas and other acts of violence on a lack of respect for authority, including for President Trump. Let's watch him.
Violence in the streets, ladies and gentlemen. Why is it happening? You know, what I'd like to give you is the fact that we have disrespect for authority. There is profound disrespect of our president all across this nation. They say terrible things about him. It's in the news of our government, disrespect for the court system, all the way up and down the line, disrespect. And when you lose that kind of respect, you lose this authority.
So those on the progressive side of issues are responsible for gun
exactly,
like this.
Exactly. Well, that's just ridiculous and offensive, borderline.
He's a Yale law graduate, you know.
Borderline obscene, though. But I mean, I think
this biblical, these really prophets of our
when you
time.
Don't have the facts on your side, you make it about culture of the other side.
Exactly.
He went back to his battle stations. I think that guy should retire anyway. Thank you, Heidi. As always, Heidi Prespa and Eugene Robinson. Coming up, profile of a mass murder. What are we learning about the motive? I think this is going to be an endless search behind the carnage in Las Vegas. We've got new clues tonight, as we try to sort out why this guy did what he did. Plus, President Trump travels to Puerto Rico to survey the damage from Hurricane Maria. Trump spent much of the weekend, of course, insulting the island and the mayor of San Juan, who's been very critical of the federal government's response. And today he chided local officials for throwing the budget out of whack and said Hurricane Katrina was a, quote, real catastrophe. And he also was throwing out bounty, the quicker picker-upper, to all the people that are lacking of water. Now they're getting paper towels. Where do you see the president doing this? It's buffoonery. And new developments tonight in the Russian invasion. We now know more about Russian operatives and how they use Facebook to sow racial discord during the 2016 election, as if we need more of that. And we've got new details about previously unknown contacts between Trump's company and Russia during the campaign. It keeps growing. Finally, my thoughts on how this Las Vegas horror fits into our political history. Hardball, where the action is.
Want to hear my...
Has grown into an enterprise. That's why I switched to the Spark Cash Card from Capital One. Now I'm earning unlimited...
Any sort of explanation?
Believe me, I sympathize with everybody who's grasping. Who on this planet do you think is understanding more than me? I can't even process this yet, really. I mean, it's just started. I woke up this morning crying.
Welcome back to Harvard. That was Vegas gunman Stephen Paddock's brother struggling to find an explanation for why his brother decided to shoot into a crowd of concert goers on Sunday. As the country tries to process this mass shooting in Vegas, investigators are working to establish the shooter's motive. He was a high-stakes gambler with the highest status, by the way, at Caesar's Palace, and a millionaire, according to his brother. He had also recently wired $100,000 to the Philippines, where his girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, has family and was visiting at the time of the shooting. There she is. I'm joined by forensic psychiatrist Dr. Paul Dietz, whose niece was at that concert Sunday night. Doctor, thank you for joining us. Do you have any sense of this man who did this shooting? Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Paul Dietz, whose niece was at that concert Sunday night. Doctor, thank you for joining us. Do you have any sense of this man who did this shooting?
I think it's premature for us to really make any judgments about his motives. We know from past mass murderers what their motives have been and the kinds of things that they thought justified their actions. But here the investigation's just begun, and the man obviously did not communicate very loudly or clearly what his mood was, what his hopes and dreams were, or why he was unhappy enough to do this.
Do you think he wanted to go out with, if to use the phrase badly, but a bang? He just wanted to go out like top of the world ma, like James Cagney in White Heat. He just wanted to go out with everybody noticing his power. Could that be as basic as it was as a motive?
Without question, that is a big part of it. You see, mass murder is the angry man's suicide. And that's because he wants that to be shown. He wants to be remembered for this. Hopefully, he will have recorded himself according to news reports. And that's because he wants that to be shown. He wants to be remembered for this. Hopefully, he will. I think that's the wrong question. I think the issue is, why do some men choose this form of suicide? And why does this form of suicide...
At the end of the thing.
I think that's the wrong question. I think the issue is, why do some men choose this form of suicide? And why does...
Doing fine. Is she okay?
She's doing as the others are, who they don't think they'll ever be able to forget this. Thanks for asking.
You're a good man. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul Dietz. Up next, President Trump has been criticized for his handling of Puerto Rico, and today's visit didn't help much. When you see some of this buffoon performance. Anyway, Trump telling officials they should be proud that the death toll isn't higher, even comparing it to, quote, a real catastrophe like Katrina. It's all scorecard stuff with it. And there he is wearing that ridiculous costume. Trump telling officials they should be proud that the death toll isn't higher, even comparing it to, quote, a real catastrophe like Katrina. It's all scorecard stuff with it. And there he is wearing that ridiculous... Welcome back to Hardball. Nearly 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria pummeled the island of Puerto Rico, 95% of electricity customers remain without power, including some hospitals. Look at that. Much of the countryside still struggling to access basic necessities like food, water, and even cash. I said the ATM machines are down. And today, President Trump landed on the island face to face with the apocalyptic world Puerto Rico has been living with. There he is. In a briefing with local and federal officials, Trump told reporters of the high praise his administration was getting, they were getting, on their response effort. Here he is.
Right from the beginning, this governor did not play politics. He didn't play it at all. He was saying it like it was, and he was giving us the highest grade. Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, who I've watched the other day, and she was saying such nice things about all of the people that have worked so hard.
Well, he also seemed to fault the island for receiving help from the government.
I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine. We've saved a lot of lives. If you look at every death is a horror, but if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died, 16 people certified, 16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people, all of our people working together. 16 versus literally thousands of people.
Well, the awkward comparison to Katrina came as his administration has been actively trying to combat the perception that they were slow to respond to the disaster on the island. The president spent the weekend attacking what he politically motivated ingrates, who he said wanted everything done for them. He also went after the mayor of San Juan, who slammed the administration's response to the hurricane, criticizing her poor leadership ability. The president's schedule was carefully orchestrated to limit his exposure to the public. That was smart. Near the end of his trip, Trump visited a relief center, tossing rolls of paper towels, bounty quicker picker-uppers into the crowd, and handing out cans of chicken and also flashlights. And for more, I'm joined by U.S. Congressman Adriana Espaillat, who's a Democrat from New York, and Yamiche Alcindor, of course, reporter for the New York Times and an MSNBC contributor. Don't know how to do this, and I know you represent probably a lot of people, Latinos and people that care about Puerto Rico. They come from there. It's part of this country. But what's the screw up about? Is it FEMA's fault? Is it Trump's fault? Is it the governor's fault? This is a lot of finger pointing going on here. Nobody seems to be saying there, except for Trump. He says, I'm doing a great job.
Well, look, I think, first of all, we were late to get there. But obviously, this is not an easy task. I think it requires really the Department of Defense to go in there and lay out a plan, almost like if they were in an armed conflict. You got to fix roads. You got to remove debris. You have to put floatable bridges to connect.
Like we did in Somalia a few years ago. We went in force.
This is no different than that kind of an operation. To rebuild Puerto Rico is going to take years. They need money. They need $20 billion right away. They can't wait another week.
Well, what would that go to?
That would go to Puerto Rico, hopefully to the municipalities. They know where the people are stuck in their homes that have not been able to get out. Right now, the U.S. forces there are airlifting some help there to those towns in the hills that have disconnected. No water, no electricity.
What's this about guys not getting in their trucks to deliver water? The people aren't just doing stuff that they're supposed to be doing. It sounds terrible.
I mean, it sounds terrible, and I think when you talk about who there is to blame, you have to think about the fact that this president essentially failed really at communicating the importance of this and staying laser focused on Puerto Rico. So many people, while they think that the U.S. government was trying to do all that it could, while his tweets on the NFL, his arguments with the mayor, all that made people feel as though he was unfocused, even if he was trying his best. The idea that you're saying, well, this is not a real catastrophe because this is not really my Katrina. He's not saying that this is terrible as Katrina. What he's really saying is that this isn't my problem.
Okay, Congressman, you're a politician, all right? There's nothing wrong with being a politician. I like politicians. But the optics, he acts like he's Prince Charles visiting one of the colonies. I mean, he shows up in that ridiculous costume with his beautiful wife. That's great. But it's very ceremonial. Doesn't it look ceremonial today? Well, like he's not really there to lead any effort. He's there to be seen throwing out, paper towels. Paper towels? Why would he be throwing like it's the Dolphins in SeaWorld? He only had enough paper towels for like 100 people there. They were all going to be looking like fools, reaching for towels, and nobody gets one.
Well, look, this is not about exchanging niceties or throwing shots with paper towels. This is about saving people's lives. I spent Saturday.
Look at it, here we go. What is this about? What is he?
Wait, but remember,
optics. What is he trying to sell there?
People, all the people that I interviewed on the campaign trail who love Donald Trump,
he's president of the United States.
Voted for an entertainer, and you know what they're getting? They're getting an entertainer. This is someone who understands that he's going there to look good. He's going there for optics. He actually says the word optics when you ask him what his motives are for certain things, like firing Tom Price. So the idea that he's not even running from the fact that he says, "Look, I built my reputation on The Apprentice, and this is what I get." You get someone that's like a reality TV president.
Yes, but even Oprah and Ellen, they say everybody in the United States is going home with a book or go home with a car or something like. He's only throwing out these little items to a few people. It's not even.
Well, and this is in San Juan or in Bayamon, but the real areas, the areas that were hard hit up in the mountains, no one ever saw.
They're not going to see him either. Anyway, throughout the visit, the president continuously referred to the low official death count as a way to congratulate officials and himself on their response to the crisis. Let's take a listen.
What's happened in terms of recovery, in terms of saving lives, 16 lives, it's a lot. But you compare that to the thousands of people that died in other hurricanes, and frankly, not nearly as severe.
Well, Fox News has reported that those numbers of his, the 16, are most likely inaccurate because the government is not functioning enough to document the true death, which is likely to rise. Yamiche, this story, is this reaching Katrina's stage in terms of bad news for the development of the administration, the effort of FEMA?
A lot of this is going to depend on how many people actually perish. I think the president is right in some ways to say that we haven't lost as many people as we did in Katrina right now. But if it goes to it's going to depend on how many people actually perish. I think the president is right in some ways to say that we haven't lost as many people as we did in Katrina right now. But George Bush essentially was most criticized because people died on their roofs waiting for the American government to save them.
Well, also, this is not at the level
because George Bush essentially was most criticized because people died on their roofs waiting for the American government to save them.
Well, also, this is not, but it could take other lives down the line when you have phase 2 or phase 3 of the storm.
It's still hurricane season as a Floridian. I know that you could still have more hurricanes.
Well, at today's briefing with local and federal officials, President Trump seemed to make it a point to exclude the mayor of San Juan. He, however, shook her hand, and then they had an interesting exchange. Let's watch him with the mayor.
How are you?
What do you think of that little physical damage control? He goes like, he's a weird guy.
I spent the Saturday with Carmen Yulín Cruz, and I saw her at work. She's a tremendous leader. Tremendous leader.
Not incidentally a great Hardball fan. She watches the show. Look, I should say it's important, but I just hope this country understands its relationship with Puerto Rico after this. It's part of our country. There's our American citizens out there. They should get equal rights and equal treatment. And I think that's a message that this president hasn't gotten. By the way, I did think back when George W. blew Katrina, I said if he'd gone down to the Astrodome down there, and he had, I think it was the Astrodome. No, that's the Astrodome, the Superdome. If he'd gone down there and just stood there all day handing out water bottles, just to all the people, everybody there, just showed. LBJ used to do stuff like this. You know, he wasn't perfect, but he understood you got to connect with people's real problems.
You have to really look like you care, especially when you have a history like Donald Trump has, where people already think that you have real issues with race, where you have real issues with inequality. This is not just Puerto Rico. It's also an island full of brown people that you need to go to and say, I understand that you're Americans. And he, so far, has kind of failed to do that. Today was a different day.
Did he notice that?
I think he noticed that, and I think that's why he went down.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. A little late there. Thank you, Congressman. It's great to have you on the show, Congressman Adriana Espaillat of New York City. Yamiche Alcindor, always from the New York Times. Up next, the latest on the Russian effort to swing the 2016 election. They get more and more involved as we look back in our rearview mirror, what role they played in 2016. New reporting now on how Russian operatives identified and targeted voters susceptible to propaganda, including racial propaganda. This is Hardball, where the action is.
Vladimir Putin had a high-level meeting with a Trump official today, an important meeting that hasn't gotten attention. Now, the last senior diplomatic meeting between Russia and the U.S. was not routine. In fact, that meeting, which Trump held in the Oval Office the day after Jim Comey was fired, is now one of the 13 categories that Bob Mueller's investigators has identified as critical to their probe. The meeting included Trump, Russia's ambassador, and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The U.S. press was barred, and some administration officials were so concerned about Trump's conduct that they leaked his shocking comments about firing Comey, which allegedly, he said, released pressure on Russia. Well, Mueller is apparently interested in whether anything in that meeting would add to any potential case regarding obstruction. Today, one of those same participants was in that new meeting I mentioned, Lavrov, plus his boss Putin, plus the newest member of Trump's Russia team, John Huntsman. So this is the mirror image of the meeting that Mueller's investigating, that May 10th meeting in Washington our president had with their foreign minister and ambassador to the U.S. Today's meeting in Moscow has their foreign minister, our ambassador to Russia, and their president. Now, we know the very last time this kind of meeting happened with Russia, Comey's Russia investigation was discussed, and then in the interim, the DOJ tapped Mueller, adding back whatever, quote, pressure Trump thought was relieved. That is quite a backstory. Now, we don't know if the Russia investigation was discussed at all today. Meanwhile, we do know Putin's spokesman struck a defiant tone, saying this meeting today should help improve relations allegedly harmed by damage done by Washington's actions. Now, the Russians, of course, damaged this relationship by hacking into a U.S. political party and undermining potentially the election confidence. Everything that's happened since then, the sanctions, the embassy clothings, it all goes back to Russia's actions. For his part, Huntsman has pledged to Congress that it was, yes, Russia's actions that harmed this relationship.
There is no question, underline no question, that the Russian government interfered in the U.S. election last year, and Moscow continues to meddle in the democratic processes of our friends and allies.
I'm joined fittingly by a man who would be in such meetings, Michael McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia under Obama, and Bill Criss, the founder and editor-at-large of the Weekly Standard. Ambassador, what do you view as important in today's meeting, and does it have any of those echoes from the previous meeting that is under investigative review?
I actually don't think so, Ari. This was the presentation of credentials that all ambassadors do. It's done on a kind of quarterly basis in the Kremlin, so there were other ambassadors present. It wasn't just a one-on-one meeting between Putin and our new ambassador. So there wasn't a substantive exchange that took place.
And do you think Huntsman's job there has some tension between his role as kind of a high-profile fixer? I mean, if you look at him here with Putin, these dramatic images, the best case scenario is he somehow cleans up some of this. The worst case is that Donald Trump, who's pressed other aides into all sorts of assignments, may press him.
Yeah, I think he has a tough assignment. I think he was a terrific hire. I've had the chance to speak with the ambassador, and I know what he's walking into. I would say two challenges he has, though. On the one hand, you just played some of his testimony. He's pretty explicit about what the Russians did in 2016. His boss, the president, is not. So there's a policy difference right there for the new representative of the President of the United States in Moscow. And number two, let's just be honest. Ambassadors in the margin can change policy, but they don't make policy. They implement policy. I'm telling you, as a former ambassador and also as a former White House official, I had a very nice ceremony with President Medvedev when I presented my credentials. We drank champagne and laughed and talked about all the reset that we're going to do. But larger forces were at play that drove the relationship into its negative place. First and foremost, as you rightly said, negative things that Vladimir Putin did vis-a-vis that bilateral relationship. So it only changes if he changes his policy, and that I don't expect.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ambassador Huntsman's task is to, well, I don't know how much he can influence Russia policy, as Mike says. We have a lot of issues with Putin meddling in our elections and in other. Yeah, I mean, I think Ambassador Huntsman's task is to, well, I don't know how much he can influence Russia policy, as Mike says. We have a lot of issues with Putin. Meddling in our elections and in other nations' elections is one of them, but that's only one. They're occupying part of Ukraine. There's a ton of issues there. They're meddling in the Middle East in ways that the Trump administration has not pushed back much on. I mean, I was talking with a conservative today, very conservative member of the Congress, who said, you know, he was very critical of President Obama's administration for allowing, almost inviting Russia into the Middle East, into Syria, and then we were so weak that they sort of managed to do more and more. He expected Trump to push back on that. Trump hasn't. So there are real policy issues with Russia that I don't know. But Huntsman, I don't think, was involved in anything in the campaign. He wasn't a big Trump supporter. He was ambassador to. I tried to recruit to run as an independent in 2016 against Trump and against Secretary Clinton. So, no, I mean, I think he'll be a diligent and honest ambassador, but I agree with Mike that the chances of him changing Trump's basic attitude towards Putin, which is one of the fundamental problems. Leave aside the illegality and all that for a minute. We have a president of the United States who, for whatever reason, is extremely tolerant and understanding and even sympathetic to Vladimir Putin, which there's a pretty good bipartisan consensus in the U.S. is not the right position to have as a matter of public policy.
And you mentioned the legal issues. The new report in the Washington Post is that Trump's lawyer and business confidant personally exchanged emails weeks before the RNC about an economic conference in Russia, which included Putin, although they didn't ultimately go. What do you view as these leaks that seem to be roughing up a lot of people, Bill, other than current White House officials?
Yeah, I mean, one task Huntsman's going to have is when some buddy of Trump shows up in Russia, and this is a problem in every administration a little bit, you know, could you open some doors for us, get us in? And some of it's legitimate. One of the things an ambassador does is help American businesses compete, you know, fairly for contracts and so forth. I would say with the Kushners in the White House, that really is astonishing, incidentally. We don't know quite what the truth is about the Trump Organization server, but having your daughter and son-in-law as special advisors as special assistants in the White House creates such and they still have all these business operations going, creates so many problems right off the bat. If I were an ambassador now, I'd be very careful when people show up and say, can you help me? You really would need to look into it and say, make sure it's a legitimate kind of helping as opposed to something that was set up in some private conversation back in 2015 or 2016 by Paul Manafort or Jared Kushner. Right, or that's designed even to implicate them in some way because foreign governments have all sorts of ways of making mischief. Bill Kristol and Ambassador McFaul, thank you both. Coming up, as I mentioned before, this major fight at the Supreme Court today, a case that could swing power nationally. I have an exclusive interview with the lawyer who was at court today.
I didn't know where I was from ethnically.
Now to a huge political battle in the Supreme Court, which could swing the national balance of power to Democrats. And an exclusive on the beat tonight, we're about to hear from the attorney who argued in the Supreme Court today, taking on Republicans in a case he says tests democracy itself. Now, the context for this blockbuster case is all about the Democratic deficit in America right now. Consider that in many places, more voters prefer the Democrats, that nationwide millions more voters backed Clinton over Trump. That in the U.S. Senate, Democratic senators represent 36 million more people than Republicans. Yet even when Democrats do win more votes, often it is Republicans who take power. And that is because the system is rigged by the right. According to challengers at the Supreme Court today, they point to Wisconsin, where in 2012, Democrats were about 51% of the vote for the state legislature. Republicans had 48.6%, but took more seats, and not by 1 or 2 points. They turned that 48.6% into 60% of the legislature seats. Now, in court today, veteran litigator Paul Smith argued that kind of outcome isn't merely just shrewd politics. He says it's a potentially illegal effort to undermine democracy. And he implored the justices, quote, "You're the only institution that can solve this problem, just as democracy is about to get worse because of the way gerrymandering is getting so much worse." And there's no doubt it's getting worse. Both parties have drawn absurd district lines to rig outcomes.
North Carolina's 12th district looks like spilled coffee. Pennsylvania's 16th is flexing its muscles. And one commentator compared Maryland's 3rd to a broken-winged pterodactyl. And then there's this. They call it the earmuffs.
Now, some states have reformed this kind of rigging. Today, one former California governor went to the court steps to call out gerrymandering and use some of his best movie lines.
It's a system where the politicians are picking the voters rather than the voters picking the politicians. So I said it's time to say hasta la vista to gerrymandering. And it is time to terminate gerrymandering. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Many voting experts agree with Schwarzenegger. They say it's past time for the court to get to the chopper and take action. Now, there are legal reasons why the court is held back. While it patrols blatant political cheating like bribery or election tampering, we all know judges do try to avoid what they consider political questions. And today's hearing shows that gerrymandering has become so blatant, even a conservative Supreme Court may step in many states. A less rigged system, though, would boost Democrats, at least in the short run, because it would return victories to the popular vote victors. That prospect alone, though, clearly worried the court today. Chief Justice John Roberts said in some quite candid remarks, if the court issues a decision, and let's say the Democrats win, and people will say, well, why did the Democrats win? It must be because the Supreme Court preferred the Democrats over the Republicans. And that's going to cause very serious harm to the integrity of the decisions of this court. Justice Roberts said that in an exchange today with attorney Paul Smith, who argued before the court for Wisconsin and their Democratic challengers. Very interesting stuff. You have been doing this a long time. You are the person to talk to. How did you counter that fair point that Chief Justice Roberts made?
Well, I basically made the point that we're facing a crisis of democracy and that gerrymandering has gotten very bad and it is about to get an awful lot worse in the next round of redistricting after the 2020 census. With the technology that's now available and with a very polarized and therefore more predictable electorate, you're going to have more people following the lead of Wisconsin, which set up a system that basically decided before anybody voted that one party was going to control the assembly for the full electorate. You're going to have more people following the lead of Wisconsin, which set up a system that basically decided before anybody voted that one party was going to control the assembly for the full 10 years that the map would be in effect.
So you argued to the court today that basically Republicans rigged Wisconsin so they would win even if they lost. How do you prove something like that?
Well, we had a full trial, and we had a ton of evidence about the way that this map functioned, and it was not that hard to prove. In 2012, they got about, as you said, 48.6% of the vote. They got 60 seats out of 99, and the evidence showed that it would take what the trial court called an unprecedented political explosion for the Democrats even to have a chance to get over 50% of the seats in the assembly, even though Wisconsin, of course, is a very 50-50 state. Right. That's why we've had all kinds of people come out and support us in this case, including many Republicans, Senator McCain, Senator Dole, Senator Lugar, Governor Kasich, It's producing bad politics, and with if the Supreme Court doesn't step in and finally do something about it, we're going to have nothing. No one can do anything about it. The politicians aren't going to fix it.
Right. We won't have, to your point, we won't have fair elections. Hang with me. I want to add into our conversation Jeremy Harrison. He's an executive with the DNC, and he formerly chaired the South Carolina Democratic Party and has called gerrymandering the greatest evil we face as a democracy. Sir, your view of this and what the court should do?
Ari, I hope the court will decide that enough is enough with partisan gerrymandering. It's time to get rid of it. It
should do.
Ari, I hope the court will decide that enough is enough with partisan gerrymandering. It's time to get rid of it. It really is the greatest threat to our democracy. It's the reason why we can't get anything done right now. When you think about simple functions of government, paving our roads, making sure that our children have health care, we can't pass that bill. And not only is a problem happening in Washington, D.C., but we're seeing it on a local level. Here in South Carolina, Republicans control the governorship and both bodies of the legislature, and it took them 6 or 7 years just to pass a roads bill. Gerrymandering has gotten so bad that folks are only talking to 20 and 30% of the people who live in their district, and no one else has any impact on them. And enough is enough. We need to take back this for the good of our country. We have to stop having...
Well, if we win, there will certainly be a tendency to make the vote a lot closer in the House of Representatives. It is true that at least a large part of the deficit of the Democrats in the House is caused by gerrymandering. There'll be other places where Democrats will lose power because they've been the gerrymanderers in Maryland and elsewhere in all likelihood. So I want to make sure we see this as a bipartisan problem and a bipartisan solution. People have come out from both sides of the aisle to try to fix this.
Let's talk about it again when we get...
So I want to make sure we see this as a bipartisan problem and a bipartisan solution. People have come out from both sides of the aisle to try to fix this.
Let's talk about it again when we get the decision, because we'll be covering a big case. Paul Smith, Jamie Harrison, thank you both, and we will be right back.
Colon cancer screening for people 50 and older at average risk.
I think it's time for a new screen, for a different kind of screen, for colon cancer.